Right. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to Howling Coyote. And I'm privileged tonight to have Joseph Schmidlin, who's an osteopath who works with sound healing, I'm going to say. He'll say more about this, of course. And he travels between Rochester, New York, and Pondicherry, India. And he works on creating new and interesting musical instruments for, I assume, use in healing, but also use in music. And so, Joseph, tell us more about what you do and how you came to do it. And it just sounds really exciting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lewis and Peter. So I worked as an osteopath and body worker for the last 30 years. And my skill set is basically listening with my hands and learning how to listen with my hands from an osteopathic perspective. And about 10 years ago, I started to work with tuning forks in my practice, and I watched it really enhance the quality of my work. And that led me down this trail of working with sound, vibration, and I'll say now to integrate. I didn't really know so much at the time. I was just curious about it, but I find it has very integrative properties. It also has very it prepares the soil. So if we consider our tissue body, the soil, the sound actually is like preparing the soil for the body work, or for the energy work, we can call it, or the osteopathic work. On one side, and on the other side, it helps the body to integrate the work easier. So that's kind of the short story of that.
And where did you study osteopathy?
I studied at the Canadian Academy of Osteopathy in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we're really lucky because the organizers of the program, one was a graduate of Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Philly, so PCOM,
Mm-hmm.
and brought in the the American program, really heavy in the medicine and the science. And then we were also very lucky because Dr. Wernham, who was 90 in his late 90s, was also kind of the impetus for the education we had. So he was bringing in real like core osteopathy. He was a student of John Martin Littlejohn's, which is the second osteopath on the planet besides Andrew Taylor Stills. So Wernham had 70 years of training and work and in the field, and he pretty much seeded us with his information. So we had a good crossover in Canada between what I will call real holistic osteopathy and the American allopathic blend of osteopathy.
Right, right. Can you tell us more about, I've never heard of this fellow. Can you tell us a little
Dr.
bit more about him?
Wernham.
Mm-hmm.
So John Wernham started the British School of Osteopathy in Maidstone, England. And what happened is Martin Littlejohn formed osteopathy with Andrew Taylor Stills back in the turn of the century in Kirksville, Missouri. So after that, he went to Chicago and started the second school of osteopathy in the US. And then from there, he went back to his homeland in Britain and to Maidstone and started the first school of osteopathy outside of the US. So he met he met Littlejohn when he was in his 20s, and Littlejohn said, "I'm going to teach you osteopathy," and took him under his wing. And he was practicing until he was 99 years old, just a few months before his 100th birthday. He had skills in his hand, and I was lucky to be treated by him and meet him, and basically his teachings were what created our school. And so anyway,
Oh, Little John, was he British?
Littlejohn was, yeah, he came from England because I heard about Andrew Taylor Stills. So he came over to the US because he was kind of he was very educated, but he was also dealt with a lot of sickness. He was a sickly person, they called him back in the day. So he went to Andrew Taylor Stills looking for a cure. And Andrew Taylor Stills was really one of the first people, he said, to address his problems. And so he kind of got hooked in, and he was deep in the science. He was a doctor, he was a lawyer, he was a theologist, an engineer. So he collected degrees in Cambridge or Oxford rather, for years. So that was a time where 2 years you get your medical degree, 2 more years you get your engineering degree, and he was just spending 10 years studying.
And they moved a little faster in those days.
Yeah. So I feel like he brought the heavy science to Andrew Taylor Stills, because Stills was more of a bone setter. He was a hands-on farmer. They called them bone setters. He would find the restriction in the body and he would adjust it. But I don't know that he brought in a lot of the science right away, except for studying bones, studying articulations and this kind of thing.
I don't know if you're aware of I'm part of a group that's been looking at the contributions of indigenous people in Missouri and Kansas to Andrew Taylor Stills' practice. I don't know if you've heard of that at all.
Well, I'm aware of that because we actually co-taught at Kata about 10 years ago.
Right,
and,
right.
As part of that, and that was really that article that I can't remember the woman's name who wrote it, but brought me in on the Kata thing. That's the first time it opened my eyes, and I said, oh, this makes perfect sense, that he would have understood the principles of healing from the Cherokees, who had these principles innately into their tradition. They were just there. So it makes perfect sense to me. I'm sure that's a story that happened.
That was Nita Renfrew. Since then, there's a Peruvian French fellow, Zagaro Perotti, who's published a paper on this, who went to the A.T. Still Museum and did research. And then Josie Conti and Barbara Mangi and I extended that with a paper that's coming out. It should be out this month about.
Please send me any of that now that we're connected. I am very interested in that.
It is really interesting, isn't it? Because in a sense, I see what you're doing as reaching back into a sort of indigenous root system of sound. And I think India is a really interesting country in that the indigenous coexists with the modern. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, the Tamil, the whole where we live in Tamil Nadu, the Tamil population, they're very close to indigenous. And I've even heard stories that there's a sect or there's a group of people that are very so far underground that you don't even come in. They don't really mix so much with the modern world. So if it's legend or myth, I'm not sure, but it's an interesting story.
Yeah. So tell us about what you do in India.
So what brought me there originally, which I still do, is I study Indian classical vocal singing with my teacher, who's in Pondicherry. That's one part of why I'm there. I also am becoming part of Oroville community, which is an international community started in 1968. And part of that community, they have a company called Svaram. So this is they make traditional instruments and they develop instruments. So this has been in place they had their 20th anniversary last year. So about 10 years ago, I started going to Oroville and I met Aurelio Hammer, who's the founder of Svaram, and we really hit it off incredibly well. And he wanted to learn more about the body and the healing, how the body is self-healing, and through a bodywork perspective. And I wanted to learn more about how does sound work and how does sound help healing you. And so he basically came from a 30-year background of sound work, and I came from, or 25, I should say, and I came from a 25-year background of body work. And so we had this, we're the same age, we had this nice crossover of trading information. So now that relationship's been 10 years in the making, and over the years, I've helped set up teaching protocols for their sound healing trainings, where we integrate the body work and the sound work together. They have a whole facility with 30 plus shop workers who are great craftsmen. So if I need a set of bell plates made in these certain frequencies, then I can have that done. And so I've been, utilizing that space and experimenting with different instruments and working with different just intonation scales, which just intonation scales are spirals, and they're open-ended spirals that go to infinity and come from infinity, if that makes any sense. And so there's a capacity for the body to self-heal when it's exposed to these frequencies, these harmonics. And I feel like it's the same frequencies that we were developed in. So it was our embryological or metabolic frequencies at vortexes at one point that we were developing in what they sometimes call the morphogenic field or the morphic field. So we're helping the body go back into that state.
Interesting. And I just realized that I failed to introduce Peter Bloom, who's here with us, who's a friend and colleague of Joseph's, and who does sound healing in Woodstock, New York. And I just want to invite you, Peter, to chime in whenever you wish with comments, questions, whatever you have to contribute.
I have some chimes.
The chimes are good.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here. I'm Joseph and I met a number of years ago, briefly, but over the last year, well, I guess starting with the O Positive Festival when I was invited to perform with you. But more recently, we've hung out, and he comes to Woodstock where I live. And he has come a couple times and done teachings at the Nest, which you know well because that's where you come for the
Right,
last
right.
several years. You've been involved. So it's a wonderful retreat center in Woodstock, and he came with MJ, his partner in crime, often, and they were doing versions of body work and sound healing, and I'm fascinated with all forms of body work. I don't know a lot about them, but they invited me to come in and bring some of my instruments, and yeah, it worked out well. And the more we got to know each other, the more we felt that we had a lot to share, a lot in common, and we could, I feel I can learn from you. We have actually an Aurobindo Center for many, many years outside of Woodstock called Matagiri. That when I moved here in 1970, they had just started, and they've been here all along. So that's connected with the Aurobindo Ashram and with Pondicherry, and so there's these interconnections that are fascinating. And we also are both good friends with John Boyo, who was one of the folks that was involved in the kata thing as well, and is the supplier of tuning forks. So that's,
Which we have some.
yes, you do.
Yes. Well, it's all very interesting because we all come at this project of helping people to recuperate from a number of angles. And I know that when I do hands-on work with people, I often sing to them. And sometimes I use rattles and drums. but I don't have the sophistication that the two of you have in music, but it still seems helpful. And I've had the pleasure of experiencing sound baths with Peter, and those were delicious. And there is something profound about sound, about music,
Mm.
and it may be that maybe it's the original healing that the drum, and maybe originally it was people hitting two sticks together. I don't know, but it seems like it must be one of the most ancient instruments known to humanity. And it certainly puts us into trance, doesn't it? Like the drum beat, the heartbeat of the earth, the cadence,
Mm.
and it certainly helps us to enter into these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I wonder if both of you guys could speak a little bit more to that role of music to bring us into these non-ordinary states where we can see ourselves differently or change or transform or grow or not, as the case may be.
I think it'd be interesting to hear from Peter first because he comes from a hypnotherapist background, and that's all about trance, right?
Yeah. So this is what you're talking about here. It's a big drum here, right? And if I play it, and I have original sound for musicians on, so it shouldn't disappear. And that's the sound, and it's both familiar and exotic at the same time for some people. But um, Mickey Hart, who many people have heard of, the drummer for the Grateful Dead, who wrote a book called Planet Drum, I think, and um, he said the body is a rhythm machine, and that I like to use that phrase because it gets people's attention. That we are pulsing rhythmical creatures, and as a doctor, when somebody has a AFib, there's an irregularity in the heartbeat. So we need to have regular rhythms of breathing, of pulse, of brain waves, of heartbeat, and digestive cycles. And there are longer rhythms and shorter rhythms. But if we're in tune and in rhythm, we're experiencing. And here's another interesting thing we say: mens sana in corpore sana, to be of sound mind and body. Well, that's interesting that that word sound means both whole and complete and healthy, but also refers to audible vibration, sound. So I've been tracking this for as long as I can remember, fascination with the connection between sound and consciousness, sound and health. Um, I mean, I could go on for hours and hours,
Mm.
but yeah, the drum probably was after the voice the first uh, instrument, most probably. Somebody found a hollow log and banged on it with a stick. Now, as far as indigenous teachings, I like to tell a story of when Harry Charger, who was an elder, came through, and he was a pretty tough guy. Um, First cousin of Arville Looking Horse. And Harry said, he looked out at a bunch of us. He said, we don't even have that word medicine man. We don't have a word like that. We might say so and so has some songs.
Mm.
Ah, But then he looked out at us and he said, "Any of you have any songs?" And we were all everybody was very intimidated. No, I don't have any songs. But over the years, I have found that there are certain songs that I've used, and by repetition, they become anchored for me. And I think tribal songs, nursery rhymes, lullabies, all have that effect. When you hear them, when grown person hears a lullaby, they immediately regress. It's an association to a time of innocence and a time of peace. And they've done, there's movements in hospice now where they send people in to play music for people who are crossing the threshold, and it seems to ease the transition. Why are angels depicted so often playing harps? This is it's endless. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to, oh, Joseph.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah. So it's interesting you talked about lullaby, and what came to me then is a lot of the lullabies are in pentatonic scales.
Yes, they
And
are.
and I think one of the key things that's coming to me in this part of the conversation is it's really a remembering.
Yes.
So if someone can go back to their original state of oneness, and somehow they can remember that on a cellular level, maybe not in the thinking brain, but in the body felt memory of this, I think then you have health and healing, because then we're whole. We go back. And I think the drum and the way the shamans are working, like with this, they're helping the cellular body remember itself, which is whole and healthy.
Hmm.
Like that's how I would kind of explain it.
I
Yeah,
think
and the pentatonic scale, there's something about these scales, these 5-note scales that are really powerful in that process. So that's the lullaby thing.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna get I'm gonna get a little instrument. Hold on one second, or keep talking.
If you could say a little bit more, some of the people who will be listening have no idea what a
And the
pentatonic
pentatonic
scale
scale.
is.
This is a kalimba, and it's a very simple one. It's a version. It's made in the U.S., but it's a version of an African instrument called a thumb piano, or a kalimba or an mbira. And this particular one, has 6 notes, and they're tuned to a pentatonic scale. So if I play it, a lot of music boxes are tuned to things like this, and it for me, those relationships of those notes is very much evocative of childhood songs and melodies and lullabies.
Mm.
It's very soothing. It doesn't have any bluesy notes or stuff like that, discordant notes, odd combinations. It's very um, well, what's the opposite of discordant? Cordant?
Yeah, I think so. Accordant,
Yeah.
concordance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
so technically, I was going to say that pentatonic is a 5-note scale, and it's about the spaces between the notes. There's no half steps. So, which I guess is a little musical, but they're either separated by a 2 or a 3. So 3 half steps or 2 half steps, and some version of that. So it'll go from 2 3 2 2 3, or 3 2 2 2 3. So it's a simple scale in a way. And what I love about it, musically to our ears, there's no wrong notes. You can play a pentatonic scale and you can play any note.
So the
It's just what
white notes on the piano.
the black notes actually would be the
Black
pentatonic,
notes.
because there's,
Yeah,
yeah.
black
So
notes.
you can play any black note, it's going to sound good. And with the white notes, there's 7 notes, right? And if you leave 2 of them out, then you can still play you play those other 5 and there's no wrong notes. So the complexity of music comes when we start bringing in half notes and more, we start dividing up the scale into finer and finer notes. It gives us more complexity and more range. But healing is really more about simplicity, less complexity. And I think originally the songs were all pentatonic because, they were simpler times. So the atmosphere was simpler. But now we've explored more complexity. And with complexity comes possibility for more disorganization. It also has more opportunity to reorganize. So depending on which view you want to look at it.
Yeah.
The the in the caves of Lascaux, I believe, those really old caves, they found a stone flute, and it was maybe 20,000 years old. Really, really old, long, oldest preserved instrument, and, and they were able to play it still, and it was in a pentatonic scale.
Wow.
Yeah. So that intervals, those feelings of between those sounds, and you know, in the world of sound healing, which Joseph and I are both involved in, there's a lot of what I call frequencyism, which is people want to assign, oh, that note, that D, that's the sound of the heart chakra, or that's the sound. And I don't know about that. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is that, like we say, mitakuyasan, right? All my relations. It's all about the relationship, right? The
Mm.
relationship between the three of us now is making a triad. It's
Right.
making
Right.
a three-note chord.
Hmm. So, so I wonder, Peter, you've heard us sing Lakota songs. Are
Yes,
they what? How do they relate to this scale, this 5 note scale?
that's a good question. Why don't you sing one, and Joseph and I'll try to figure it out.
All right, I could do that. Olo kile Eya Mitsuya Poyo Mitsuya Poyo He Olo Kile Eya Poyo He Mitsuya Poyo He Eya Poyo.
Hmm.
Yeah. I would say that's definitely a pentatonic melody. It's also about the rhythm. It's really the rhythm also, that cadence that it just puts you in trance just
Yeah,
hearing it.
Yeah.
And the Native American flute is a minor pentatonic scale.
Oh,
That
no kidding.
so yeah, and
I
and
heard
you
some minor notes in that melody. I
yeah.
heard some bluesy minor notes a little bit.
So it was it's having a dog attack.
So that's what happens there. I've been at your house.
Yeah. Minor interruption. So, so it's a minor pentanoic scale, you think?
Pentatonic, yes. And it's
Pentatonic.
interesting because just a talking point about sound. Can anyone still hear the rhythm that you're playing? Like
Yes,
it's in there.
yes, it's in
And
there.
and it and these pentatonic scales, they drop into the body really deeply and into the cellular memory.
And when Lewis was singing, I could also hear an overlay of an Umu Sangare song, and she's singing from Mali. And
Yeah,
very similar. So you
yeah.
get these things that will occur, it's like the shamanic landscape that
Hmm.
different shamans in different parts of the world all were going long before there was connection on the physical plane, were going into these states and reporting the same stuff that they found outside of physical reality. So there seems to be these commonality of these lullabies from Africa and lullabies from Mongolia and from Alaska, from Patagonia, will all employ the same harmonic scales and relationships.
Now, what about Oriental music? Because as a non, you know, as an unsophisticated person, I've always heard that Oriental music is on different scales and different from Occidental music. But is that really true in terms of lullabies or some of these things that we're talking about?
I know they use a lot of pentatonic scales, but I'm not really an expert on, medicine or songs from that side of the world.
Mm,
And, I'm not an ethnomusicologist either. I, like Joseph, have studied North Indian classical music. And it's a little vague when you say Oriental, because that
yeah,
just
I'm
means
thinking of Japan and China.
and in China. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you
Mm.
hear in a Japanese or Chinese restaurant, probably.
Well, a lot of it also has to do with the way you get from one note to another.
Yeah.
We when I was studying the sitar, Joseph, my teacher had a thick Indian accent, and he would say, it is a pulling system." I couldn't figure out what he was saying. He was saying it's a pulling system, that you
Yeah,
pull the note. You don't,
right.
like on the piano, there's no passing notes. You either hit the note or the note next to it. With a lot of cultures like Indian or Chinese music, or you'll take a note, uh, and you'll slide to it. We have that a little bit in jazz, which drew from Africa, but the Western European classical tradition is the tempered scale, and you're in tune or you're out of tune.
Yeah.
You're on and off, yeah.
There's not a lot of sliding around.
They don't no, they don't like those microtones.
Hmm. Hmm. It's fascinating, really, to think about what does that say about consciousness and in the various cultures, the music that people like.
Mm.
One of the things that maybe you guys can comment on this, but one of the things that Barbara and I learned when we once spoke at a conference in a casino in Washington State was that the casino was all in the key. It was all in the key of C and G.
Hmm.
Ah, re- you mean all the sounds that you were hearing?
Yeah, all of the slot machines and everything.
How did you discover that?
We were the casino director told us. He said, these are the chords that make people relaxed and spend more money.
Ah,
Well, what the basic tuners that I
Yeah,
suggest
C
everyone
and
start
G.
with are C and
Those
G.
those are your
Yeah.
basic
so
tuners.
yeah, so that's actually going back to Peter's comment about relationship. That's actually the relationship between the C and the G is what they call a consonant relationship, or the most consonant, and they call it the perfect fifth also. So it's 7 half notes away from one note is the perfect fifth. So it C and G, but it could also been D and A,
Yes.
right? Or E and yeah. So depending on where your starting point is, you just move 7 half steps away and you find the perfect consonant note. And that all gets the science of that, it all gets back to the harmonic series
Mm,
and how we build the harmonic series. So anytime we play one note, the first overtone is actually in that note. And some people can even hear it. Musicians will hear that. And that first overtone will always be a doubling of that note. So if you played a C, the first overtone is going to be another C. So the next overtone is going to be the perfect fifth. So that's going to be the G. And then the next overtone above that's going to be another C. So in your first four, you got your fundamental tones, and your first three overtones above that, all you have is C and G. You have the fundamental reinforced 3 times, and then the consonant or the perfect fifth is in there 1 time. And it's the simplest ratio is the perfect fifth, besides the 1, just having the fundamental. So again, it's getting us back to source. It's getting us back to this harmonic relationship in the body. Okay.
And it's really interesting to reflect on the ethics of how getting us back to source makes us gamble more.
Well, you're relaxed, you're not stressed, right? And maybe people will stay, they'll stay in the casino longer.
And that's what they told us. That's what they told us. That's why they did it. And they also pump oxygen in for the same
There
reason.
you go.
Yeah.
What I found fascinating when I learned about this was the correlation with sacred geometry.
Hmm.
That a C and a G is in what's called a 2 to 3 relationship. So just a little quick math, a C tuning fork is 256. That's a middle C, I believe. And then the G that I use is 384 beats per second. So half of 256 is 128. If you add 128 to 256, you get 384. So it's a 2 to 3 relationship mathematically. And apparently, what I've been told is that this proportion repeats itself in the body. Is that true, Joseph? As an osteopath, that there's a three relationship.
It's the golden means. It's the
Oh,
Greeks really got heavy into this, and when you look at the body, our body's proportioned. The finger, the way the knuckles are, the way all the joints, it's in a 2 to 3 relationship.
3 to 2,
Upper torso to lower torso. They can divide it all the way out. And if someone wants a really fun reference to this, there's a Donald Duck. If you search Donald Duck and Pythagoras,
of course.
Donald Duck explains this idea, and he shows it graphically. It's
You gotta love it. Come on.
Watch that and you'll understand exactly what we're talking about. But they built the buildings that way too. And if you look at the structures that the Greeks built, also the painters use that too. They would do the proportion of the face. Sometimes they would even draw out boxes of, that were in relation to 2 to 3. So they know how to get the spacings of the eyes to the mouth and the upper torso to the lower torso. So this was taught in art classes, for hundreds of years.
Yeah, we have a friend in Santa Fe who teaches people how to draw faces. And one of the things we learned from her was that the eyes are 2/3 of the way up the face. So it's all connecting. Yeah.
2 to 3. And it's called the golden means, if you want to dig into it further. It's the golden ratio or the golden means.
Yeah, the phi. Is that the phi?
Phi, yes.
Yeah, fascinating. I wonder, do you know if there's any relationship of that to the Fibonacci sequence?
Yeah, I think it is. That's it is exactly that, isn't it? So we got 1, 2, and then 2 plus 1 is 3, and 3 plus 2 is 5, and then 5 plus 3 is 8, and that's the Fibonacci series. And we work with that all the time in the sound work and thinking about frequency.
It's also in the voice, the series that Joseph was referring to, the C, C, G, C, is the overtone series that you've heard me do, that weird singing thing where you hit one tone and then you hear all these kind of higher whistling tones come in over. That's that same series. It occurs naturally in shaping a sound, that it moves through that series. So there's something very universal about it.
Yeah, because the Fibonacci sequence describes the winding of the DNA, and it
Mm.
describes the way that tree branches shape themselves to get the maximum sunlight. And, it's just so universal in biology, which I think you're telling me so is this sequence.
Harmonic series, yeah.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Yeah, it 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 makes one imagine that there's some fundamental organizing principles at work.
You think?
Something like
Yeah,
that. Now, the Masons or the Rosicrucians talk about the the divine architect?
I think they do.
Something like
Yeah,
that, right? You
yeah,
know, it's seen as who constructed this was very aware of proportions, architectural proportions, like what would hold an arch in place, etc., things like that. Mm.
yeah, and it makes me think of those arches that are built with no cement, where
Right.
the
Mm.
rocks hold them in place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like people.
yeah, like people. Well, and it's interesting because I read that the Fibonacci sequence allows plants to maximize the amount of sunlight that they receive on their leaves.
Yeah, I read that also.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, I think given the chance, nature always optimizes itself, right? It creates, best possibilities.
Right, right. We're working toward, well, most of nature, except for humans, are working toward optimization.
Well, yeah, because maybe we're not exactly working with nature anymore.
Right,
That's the
right. Yeah, we
it's again
probably stepped out of nature when we started the Anthropocene and we started enriching the world with plutonium.
yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Industrial Revolution didn't do much for us either.
no, not at all. Not at all. So what new instrument will you create next? Have you fantasized about your next
Well,
project?
I'm really interested in the noble gases, and I'm interested in colors and working. So we can see one octave of color. We see from red to violet, which is basically in a very high part of the frequencies. We are basically can see this one octave, and we hear 11 octaves. We hear between 20 and 20,000 hertz. So what we did is we took that one octave of color and we brought it down in frequency to to something we could hear, and so created bell plates. I created some bell plates that I've been playing now. Peter got to hear them. I brought him to one of his sound baths recently, and we don't know what they do yet. But we're all fascinated with them, and we really love the environment it creates. And I think it puts us into a natural trance in a way. So that's what I'm excited about now is the colored bell plates.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm also interested in um, the different elements like hydrogen and helium and things like that, and how they work with how we can convert those to frequencies and working with those frequencies. So that's something I'm diving into a little bit, and I've created some things, but it's all in the very early stages. And but really what I find is going back to the simplicity is really the key for setting up the healing environment. Um, and then, the more complex stuff gives us opportunity to integrate. So it gives us an opportunity to stretch ourselves and to integrate more complexity, which we need to do now because of the way the world has moved, the Industrial Revolution. Everything's becoming more and more complex, and if we don't have the ability to integrate to that complexity, we're going to have disease process, unless we just, disappear to Hawaii and go onto an island or go to Pondicherry and go back in time, and find these havens, if you would.
I would love to add on as far as simplicity. Um, this would not be complete without at least one short Nasruddin story.
Mm,
So, um,
Perfect.
Mullah Nasruddin was known, for those who don't know, as a holy fool from the Sufi tradition. There's a collected book of stories about him called Wisdom of the Idiots. And can you relate out there, all you on Howling Coyote podcast? Um, and he was also a musician, and he was out in front of his courtyard playing on his rabab, on his lute from Afghanistan, and he was just playing furiously this one note over and over again, same note. And his wife finally said, Nasruddin, what are you doing? There are wonderful musicians in town playing beautiful melodies, countless and endless variation, but you're just playing this one note over and over again. And he said, yeah, aha, but they are all looking for this note.
Nice.
very good. Very good. Yeah. Well, it is an amazing universe that we live in. Um, and I think healing is mysterious, and we're all fascinated by it. And we recognize it when it happens, and we want to make it happen more, and sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. And when we can't, we're frustrated. And then we realize that it's a bigger universe than just us, that we can't control it. And I was thinking of this, one of the philosophers that I'm reading these days is Hartmut Rosa, who's a German philosopher of sociology, and he talks about the ravages of that capitalism has produced through acceleration and alienation, that everything just keeps going faster and faster and faster. And the more that happens, the more alienated we are from nature, from ourselves, our souls, each other. And he talks about the solution being resonance, that we have to find resonance with each other. And resonance is a musical term.
Yes, it is.
Something you guys can relate to. And in sociology, I think it has the same meaning as it does in music, but with people instead of sounds. And maybe people are sounds, sophisticated sounds. I mean, in the Hebrew tradition, God made the world with a voice, with a sound. The Genesis, the word was something, the world became. So it became, I mean, and a word is not a word if it's not enunciated, if it's not spoken. So the spoken word made the world. So that must have been a sound that created the world and was the original resonance. So there's something for you guys to riff off for our final minutes, I hope.
Nada Brahma. Nada Brahma, which is Sanskrit for God is sound.
Wow. How about that?
So yeah. So also in the Indian tradition, they talk of, Shiva being the one, and then him breathing out creation, right? So that's the first doubling of the octave, okay, that we were talking about. So it's like, and then he created this, and then what happened from there is all creation just took off, and that's the perfect fifth. That's the relationship of harmony and the perfect fifth. And then we went off and we got more and more and more complex. And you know what's at the end of the complexity? Noise.
Noise.
Chaos.
So
Yeah.
chaos, freak, and what we have out in the world, we have so much complexity that we created so much noise. And that's a lot of noise around our field that we have to integrate. And for most people now, that it's too much. I think we've reached a level of too much. Think about our indigenous tribes. We were all one community. And this is where the resonance thing comes in too, is if we're resonating with another being, we're not at war with them. We're not fighting them. We recognize them as us. So the same with nature. We recognize nature as part of us. The earth is a living entity, a living being. Just because it doesn't have the same cerebral cortex and thought capacity we have doesn't mean it's not alive. And also, if we can come to relationship with the part of us that is beyond our mental faculty, not everything we can understand. And I think that's where the sound actually reminds us and does the healing for us. Okay. But first we have to come into dissipate some of this noise, either by integrating it through our practices, or we can escape from it and just go into our own space, or just remove ourselves from it. Because you think about back in hundreds of years ago, the Native American, they never, in this tradition, they were never separate from nature. They were never separate from each other. They recognized the resonance already, and it was just part of the indigenous thought form process. And we're in this world now of separation. You're different than me.
Right.
We're not looking. So community is a huge player in our healing process for the world.
Right.
And I think we're getting there. It seems like
you're more of an optimist than I right now.
But right now,
he's a little younger than us, Louis.
Oh, okay.
You ever hear this idea? You have to break an egg to make an omelet.
Yeah.
I think we're breaking some eggs right now.
Oh,
we're working on resonance.
Resonance means to resound.
Resound, yeah.
Resonance, resonance.
Or resound.
Resounding.
Yeah.
One time, Beautiful Painted Arrow had us all journeying, and he gave each person a job. He said, you go and journey and go meet the spirit of the moon and bring back a message from that being. And you go meet the spirit of the chair and bring back a message from chairness. And I kept hoping he would ask me to journey to meet the spirit of the drum. But someone else got that. But what he gave me was the task of journeying to meet the being of the drumstick. And so I went on this journey, and I met this drumstick, and it looked like the Disney, broomsticks from the Sorcerer's Apprentice. It had little arms and legs. And I said to it, so, what message do you have? What should I tell the people? I said, repeated contact for the sake of resonance. I thought, well, that's a pretty universal message.
Yeah.
Every time that I go find a friend and call them up or have dinner with them or have a gathering of like-minded people, it's repeated contact for the sake of resonance. And that's actually what a drumstick does. It hits the skin of the drum over and over again, repeatedly, to get this resonating sound.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what we do when we get together with our friends.
Yeah.
Their voices and our connections.
Wow.
It seems like a really wonderful place to stop. If people want to get a hold of you, Joseph, how do they do that?
So I'm part of a company, a small company, a real company, because it's the company I want to keep. So it's the 5 of us, and it's called One Tone Sonic Alchemy. We have an Instagram, One Tone _Sonic _Alchemy, or a website, onetone.one, for our instruments and our workshops and things like that. So that would be the best way. probably to get a hold of me, or you could get my email from Peter or Lewis also.
Right. Happy to give it out. Well, this
Yeah,
was
thank
really
you.
fun, you guys, and I learned some
Yeah,
things, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to stop the recording and say thank you, you guys, for coming on.
thank you, Lewis, and thank you, Peter.
That